Hey folks, if you're wondering whether today's episode is for you, we are about to discuss what we as writers can do to get our work noticed and maybe even purchased in a world where it seems like nobody's buying anything right now, at least not until 2025, as everybody keeps saying. We're also going to look at what we can do with user-generated content to accelerate our progress into the industry, and we'll also look at why the industry currently seems kind of confusing with lots of mergers and acquisitions going on. It can kind of feel like it's all collapsing into one giant company. Is that the case? And if so, does that impact us as writers? What should we be doing about that? All of that and more coming up on this episode of the Write in the Head podcast with me, John Paul Sperling. This is the podcast where we talk about the many facets of being a screenwriter, particularly focusing on the mindset it takes to turn what can be a passionate pastime into a thriving career, and then, of course, how to stay there for the long haul. Helping me out on that mission today, she's a screenwriter, she's a comic, she's a researcher for a major studio, she's an incredibly fascinating human being. Her name is Kacey Johnson. Kacey, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, John. Thanks for having me. Got my coffee in hand, go through, so I'm always ready.
A screenwriter and a cup of coffee. It just doesn't get better than that. That's the start of every day.
Honestly, truly.
So I'm very excited about today's episode. Before we get into the industry conversation, because that is going to be super interesting, tell me a bit more about yourself. How did you come to be a screenwriter? Has it always been something you've been interested in? Is it something that happened later for you? What was that story for you?
Yeah. For me, I've always been a writer. I remember writing stories back when I was a kid. I was in the drama department from elementary school up until middle school, huge thespian. And actually, I wanted to sing until one day I sung in front of my mom and she said, "Listen, I love you so much, but you cannot sing." So I was like, okay, maybe I should pivot to something else instead. But it did take me a while to admit that I wanted to be a screenwriter. I always thought, oh, I should do the safe route. Let me just do science. And then I found out just how much schooling that required. I was like, okay, I don't want to be school forever. I was like, maybe a journalist. And then I found out just how dangerous it is to be a journalist. So I was like, okay, maybe I should be honest with myself. But it really took the last year in undergrad where I had a class in communications. Shout out to Eve. He basically asked us to interview someone who's in the profession we want to be in. And I was like, you know what? I want to be a screenwriter. So I looked through LinkedIn and I happened to find a screenwriter who was based in Tallahassee, Florida, because I went to Florida State the University at the time. And I interviewed him. We clicked really well. I think the funniest thing was I told him, hey, I'm writing currently screenplays on Word. And he gasped. He was like, Word? Oh, no. Like, I will give you final draft. Like, never tell me you're writing a Word again. And that's kind of where I got my start. I started applying for fellowships before I had any idea how to format or write a script, honestly. But it led me to some really great opportunities. It led to Stowe Story Labs, where I did a development grant and a writer's retreat for 2 years. I did a lot of script coverage. I also led to Carnegie Mellon University. That's where I did entertainment industry management. And I remember the program director just sitting me down. He's like, listen, you seem more creative. This is more business focused. I want you to know that we're not really writing in this program. And I said, I understand, but I feel like as a creative, I need to understand the business side of things too. I could always write on the side. And that's what I did the whole time. But it's been an interesting journey. I feel like most screenwriters, we're always trying to find a way to make money off of our screenplays. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. Let me just film myself. So I'm working on a pilot right now. I finally have like a DP director. So we're shooting that. And I'm also working with a development producer. I can't really speak much about it because it's still, happening, but we're trying to pitch something as well to some major studios.
I love that. I love that. I'm in the same kind of position actually. I've been writing for a long time and then just recently went back to a former life of mine, which was acting, and thought, hang on a second, I'm sure I could be doing more than just writing at the moment because I think in order to get noticed, like wear all the hats that you can. If you can do acting, if you can do directing, if you can put on the producer hat, there's no reason to stop at just screenwriting. And I don't mean just as in there's not much to screenwriting. It's a craft. It's one of the hardest things to do. But if you can then layer on those other creative hats, I think you can only really improve your chances of making something, right? Making a go of it. And you've already mentioned to me that you're also a comic, so I'm assuming that most of the work you do is comedic in tone. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is accurate. My first pilot was definitely a comedy based loosely off my life. The current thing I'm working on with my DP and director is the comedy as well. I think the only thing that's not a comedy is the project I'm currently working on with this development producer. But in my opinion, I feel like even that IP has comedic moments. So
Right, right.
comedy is just my second love.
Yeah, I live and breathe it. I can't turn it off.
Mhm.
I have that kind of brain. If you hear a line that's kind of a setup, you have to just chime in with the punchline, and it's borderline troublesome because I can't switch that off, and that's not appropriate in certain work meetings. But that's why I try and surround myself with other comedians because they understand that. Um, I have to, but before we go further, I have to ask you about this virtual background because that's definitely not comedy unless you're writing a
Oh,
fantasy comedy, which I think is a good idea. I don't know that many people have done that. But what is this background all about? I'm so intrigued.
that is interesting because I just literally Googled like interesting backgrounds and I landed on this. Like, I actually have no idea. I've had this background for 2 years and I haven't changed it.
Well, look,
But
you
yeah,
Googled interesting background, you got a hit. That is an absolutely interesting background. So Google did a good job.
I know, right? Shout out to Google.
Shout out to Google. Yeah, they could do with the advertising. Not many people have heard of them. So,
Never heard of them a day in my life.
no, but I like to support small businesses. So, shout out to Google and McDonald's and Microsoft. I hope they do well. I really do. All right, so enough of the silliness. Let's talk about the industry. So when I reached out to you and said, what do we want to talk about on this episode? You made a really good point, which is that the industry today is complex. There's things going on that most writers are probably not fully, if at all, aware of. And I think
Yeah.
the follow-up to that is, do we need to be? And if so, how can we become more aware of what's going on? And I love this subject because I would consider myself to be a fairly knowledgeable person in life in general. I like to stay informed, but honestly, I don't feel like I have a good idea of what is going on in our industry. And it does keep changing. It seems like every day, if you read the trades, something new is going on. And you could be forgiven for saying it's all going to collapse into one giant company eventually because everyone keeps buying everyone. So
One, exactly.
let's open this up with the understanding that you are the expert on this subject. So I will probably be asking more questions and then just shutting up and listening. What do you think is the current situation that would be the most relevant to screenwriters? What do we need to know about the shape of the industry today?
Um, I feel like it does depend if you are more, well, you said screenwriter, so I'm assuming television side. I
Yeah, let's
think
do
you,
that.
yeah, let's focus on television. I think you need to understand that streaming is not profitable. And the reason why we see a lot of companies like a Netflix, for instance, starting to do ads is because it's not profitable. They spend way too much money on content. A lot of these companies just spend, not realizing whether or not it was fruitful. And so we're at a point now where a lot of these companies are looking outside of the US to either shoot or even get content just because it's more affordable. A lot of companies are going back to just licensing their content because they're realizing the hard way that, oh, the dream Netflix sold us with House of Cards and all these amazing shows is a lie. And that lie is that streaming is profitable. It's something that a lot of startups go through. And I feel like if writers start looking at these streaming companies, more so Netflix, Amazon, and Apple, as a tech company as opposed to entertainment, it will make it easier not to take things personal because these are tech companies first, entertainment second.
Mm,
Amazon's goal is not for you to watch their
that's really
Prime videos.
interesting.
It's for you to buy their stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Same thing
Yeah.
with Apple. The goal is not for you to watch Apple TV. It's great if you enjoy it. The goal is for you to buy Apple products.
Wow. So what we're looking at, you could describe it as the most elaborate marketing and advertising campaign of all time,
Yeah.
where instead of using just commercials, they're using TV shows and full-length feature films to bring people to their brand so that they can then purchase stuff. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that's
Wow.
pretty accurate. I think the where the problem lies is that the major studios, like the old studio systems such as a Disney and NBC, a lot of them did not recognize that that's what these companies were doing. And so for those
Mm.
like Disney, that at least they have theme parks and the NBC Universal, they have something to fall back on. But
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
studios
Disney
like
are not
Paramount,
struggling. Yeah.
yeah, other studios like Paramount, they do not have a business model outside of entertainment, outside of film and TV.
Right, and
So
this is why they just got bought out by Skydance, or
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. So do you think that there's a feeling of regret among these other companies that followed the Netflix model? Do you think there's resentment there, or do you think it's just, well, nobody could have predicted where this was going to go, so we're kind of all in this together, and we understand that, yeah, we just got it wrong this time. Is the whole world blaming Netflix? Is what I'm asking you.
Yeah, I don't even think the world is blaming Netflix. I think the world is just confused because Netflix is still operating as if what they're doing is very successful. But if you look at the fact that they've been restructuring their entire organization, the layoffs in their animation department, they just hired Dan Lin, who comes from DC, to head their department. You could tell that Netflix is trying to rein in their losses. And the other companies are at a point now where they are trying to fall back on their old models, but also what made them successful in the first place.
Hmm.
So you're going to see a lot of companies license more content to Netflix and Amazon because at least they make money off of that versus having it on their own streaming platform solely and relying on subscribers. Because the subscription model is, think of it like this: if you buy a subscription, all you're paying is probably what, $9 a month,
Yeah,
versus
it's
if you're
it's it's
watching, yeah,
somewhere between nine and I think maybe the most expensive you can pay is 90, and that's for a bundle, a package where you get several platforms owned by the same company.
similar to cable, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, heading back towards cable.
heading back towards cable. It's one of those things where $9 a month is nothing compared to advertisement dollars, where you could generate millions of dollars if you get people to watch your shows and buy your products.
Right. Yes, it's the reoccurring revenue model. I have a business background, and the reoccurring revenue model is very powerful in and of itself because it's the kind of money that people don't ever pay attention to. So if they're paying $9 a month, it's unlikely that they would ever cancel. So
Right.
you have a fairly predictable monthly revenue stream from the memberships. And on top of that, like you were saying, the big bucks come in from the ads, from the ad revenue. So it's a very powerful combination that, I mean, a lot of companies use this even outside of the entertainment industry. Just reoccurring revenue is a very, very powerful model.
Exactly. And I feel like the difference is a lot of other industries are not so, how do I say this? They're not stuck in this idea that content is king. They recognize that the consumer is king. So you want to cater your content, you want to cater your product towards the consumer.
Mhm.
Whereas
Mhm.
for a long time in media, prior to streaming, you had media telling us and showing us what we should want. But when streaming came along and social media at large and all this user generated content, for the first time, it's the consumers making content and saying, no, this is actually what we want. And for companies that have listened, which I feel like has more so been social media companies, is why Netflix considers TikTok a competitor versus other streaming platforms.
Okay, let
They're
me
getting,
just, sorry to, I just have to
yeah,
kind of cut in at that point. Netflix considers TikTok a competitor. Okay,
yes,
that just kind of blew my mind. Can we double click
yes,
on that just for a moment and then we'll come back to
of
what you were
course.
saying?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think this article came out deadline maybe 2 years ago, where they were talking to the CEO of Netflix at the time, and he mentioned, honestly, I see TikTok, I'm paraphrasing, this is not his exact quote. I see TikTok as a competition, which makes sense if you think about the demographic that's on TikTok. It's primarily 18 to 24, that sweet spot.
Mm.
And a lot of like Netflix shows that were getting popular because of user generated content.
This is what happened with Quibi. When I first
Yeah.
moved to LA, my first job was as a producer on a Quibi show. And
Mhm.
I would trust Jeff Katzenberg with anything, but he
Yeah.
didn't quite get it right with Quibi. And I think what he tried to do is find that middle ground between social media and streaming where it was short form content but high quality. And
Yeah.
I don't think he quite, well, look, I'm not going to say he didn't quite realize this because that would insinuate that I knew something he didn't, and I would never make that insinuation because the guy is a genius. But retrospectively, it looks like he didn't quite appreciate the power of streaming on social media, that it already had so much pull for the short form content. And this is before shorts really blew up like they are now, but it was still, you want to watch high quality 8 or 9 minute video clips? That already exists. It's
Exactly.
happening already. I don't think there was quite the line of sight there to see, yeah, this might not actually be a thing that people need. This isn't really a gap in the market right now.
That, and also I feel like a lot of people go on sites like a TikTok or even RIP Vine, not necessarily to see high quality, but to see everyday people.
I think the same thing. I mean, I get what they were trying to do with Quibi,
Mm.
but again, if I just want to watch 7 or 8 minutes worth of content, do I care about production value? I
Yeah.
I'm not looking at funny cat videos in 8K. I don't really need that. It kind of ruins it actually. I want it to be handheld iPhone footage with a bit of wobble going
Yeah.
on because it feels more real. So, yeah. Anyway, I didn't want it to derail us too much, but I can relating back to that, I can kind of see now why Netflix would say something like, yeah, TikTok could be considered a competitor. At the end of the day, it's all eyeballs, right? We're all in this
Yeah.
game of eyeballs. We want people's attention. And so anything that is taking attention away from Netflix or any other streaming platform, yeah, absolutely. I could see that. It just struck me when you said it that I don't think I've ever seen it that way before, but it makes perfect
Mm.
sense.
Yeah, I feel like I had a professor back in Carnegie who he broke it down really well. And we were talking about why does Netflix see TikTok as a competition? And we started to do more research and look at the fact that minus millennials, Gen Z consumes significantly less long form content than any other generation. And then if you look at Gen Alpha, they're consuming even less long form content. And if
Mm,
you look
that
at what's
tracks. Yeah.
growing, yeah, if you look at what's growing industry wise and entertainment, it's video games, it's social media,
Yes. Yeah.
it's content that people could create themselves.
Hmm. I just
And
actually was on
yeah,
Netflix 2 days ago and I saw they now have games to play on Netflix. I don't know how long that's been going on for. I don't use the platform too often, so I could be breaking old news here, but I hadn't seen it before. And it was one of those moments where I just thought, "Oh, this is a shift. Netflix now has games on their actual platform. Haven't seen that before."
they started investing more in games like about 2 years ago.
There you go. Old news, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's not old news per se because I feel like they're still figuring it out themselves. And
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not on the platform too often and I don't go searching. If I'm on Netflix, it's probably because I'm revisiting a show that I really love and I want to watch it again. So I'm not really openly scrolling. I don't do a lot of openly scrolling on anything. It just feels like a time suck and I'm kind of too busy to do that. So I pre-decide what movie or show I'm going to watch, and then I find out what platform it's on so I can go there and watch it. Anyway, nobody needs to know about my streaming habits. This is not the point of this conversation. um,
No, but I think you bring up a good point. Is no one's open scrolling Netflix because it's just a long abyss of looking for shows and hoping you like the content. Whereas if you're scrolling on TikTok, it's the algorithm is catered to your taste. And the more
yes,
you
yes.
scroll, the more videos are going to cater towards your taste.
Mm,
And I feel like that's where a lot of platforms, particularly platforms like an Apple TV that doesn't have a lot of content, is struggling right now. Is to get
yeah.
people cater tastes. Um,
And I would say also, now I'm thinking about it, another massive advantage for user-generated content like on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, because it's user-generated, it's not subject to the same, it's not quite standards, but let's just say Disney or Apple. They have to
yeah.
be careful what they put out. They can't put out extreme content. They can't put out algorithmically calculated left or right wing content to try and attract those people. If anything, they kind of have to stay right in the middle. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the case with social media. You can go as extreme as you want. Okay, you might get your account banned or blocked eventually, but I mean, looking at platforms like X, there's so much extreme content on there that
Yeah.
that's going to be much more addictive to your audience. It's going to pull them in a lot more than, like you said. Can you imagine endlessly scrolling through movies on a platform? It's not. It's just not that much of a hook, is it? It's just boring after a while.
Exactly. And I feel like Netflix started off with minus House of Cards. They started off as people forget they were like Blockbuster at the
Yeah,
time, but
yeah.
they were
Yeah,
delivering DVDs, they were delivering like CDs and stuff, and they switched their model online, which I think was brilliant of them.
yeah. Their
So
whole
it
thing
makes
was just
them,
no late
yeah,
fees. That was their hook to start with.
yeah,
It was just no late fees because it was all done with DVDs in the post, so you couldn't get a late fee. And it was like, what? I can keep this as long as I want. And then, yeah, I actually, funnily enough, I worked at a Blockbuster video store at that point.
really.
Yep, yep.
Do you
It
still
was.
have your like Blockbuster like name tag or uniform? Because I feel
It,
like that's worth a lot of money now.
I wish I had kept it. Actually, my sister and I both worked at the same store because it was in the town we both grew up in. I don't think either one of us kept any of the what would now be considered memorabilia. It was didn't feel like it at the time. It didn't feel like it would be worth anything. But
Yes.
looking back, it was, oh, this new thing called Netflix, and there's no late fees, and it's all done in the post. That's never going to catch on. That's never going to work. Um, yeah, shame that we didn't see it coming. But that was back when we were asking Jeeves instead of Googling things, and the
Yeah.
world was very different. And we were taking our reels of film to a pharmacy to get it developed rather than digital cameras. Just I've seen a few changes, Casey. I've seen a few
Yeah.
changes in my life.
I've seen a few too, not as much as you have, but I could say truthfully, I remember when Netflix came out, and this is already when YouTube started, like their streaming platform. And YouTube started like around 2005. And I remember people are saying, "Oh my gosh, I love the fact that I could binge content." And in my mind, going, "I've been doing that on YouTube since 2005." Back when they did not copyright wasn't so strict, so people are just uploading so much content onto YouTube, like reruns of Golden Girls, reruns of like some of your favorite shows. And if you couldn't find something in your like in your country that was like English dub, you would go on
Mm.
YouTube because YouTube typically had it. I watched so much anime and like Asian dramas that was split up into so many parts because people are just fan subbing it. That's the
Mm.
culture like I grew up on. So seeing binging being a thing that's so popular now to the point where there's a phrase Netflix and chill has been fascinating to me. I have like a love hate with Netflix. Like I kind of root for them just because I feel like in a lot of ways they're seeing the trends that I feel like my generation has seen and they're hopping on it first, whether it's the binging, the anime. Now they're investing so much into content globally. They're recognizing what I feel like a lot of older studios are still catching on to, which is that the world has changed. most people who consume content are not in the US necessarily. And there's such a shift. And like, look at Squid Game, for instance, which I wasn't shocked grew so popular because there's been so many Korean dramas that were popular just amongst fans of it for over a decade. It just took Squid Game to finally burst the bubble and make it mainstream. But for a while now, there's been so many people out, whether it's in the United States or even outside of the United States, have been fans of these dramas and watching these shows. Like, I have friends who like they used to go on sites to watch British TV because you couldn't find that on a show in America. You know, it wasn't
Yeah.
on
Yep.
Nickelodeon, it wasn't on Disney. Whereas I feel like the older studios are still clinging on to American content and the old model because that's what they know.
Right. Yeah. 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 I could talk about the details of this for an exceptionally long time. I find it very, very fascinating. What I would quite like to do is steer us towards how does this impact screenwriters and what should we
Yeah.
be doing about this? Because rather naively, maybe, I think that as long as I keep focusing on doing my work and improving my craft and getting my ideas done, finished, spread out there, networking with the right people, that feels like that's all I can do. And this
Mhm.
information is useful insofar as I like to feel informed. But is there a practical side to what we're talking about here? Does it impact what we're doing as writers and how we should be thinking about our careers? Does it change anything there?
Yes, because I feel like as writers, we should be looking years ahead, especially because the studios at times are not. And so part of the reason why I'm currently just filming my own work is I recognize the fact that a lot of studios are not willing to take risks unless it's an IP that's been successful. If you look at a lot of writers who have gotten deals lately, whether it's Quinta Brunson with Abbott Elementary, Easter Way with Insecure, a lot of them have done their own user generated content for years on YouTube, whether it's been web series or just cameos and stand up. And that has gotten eventually the attention of whether it's the agents or the studios. I know for Issa Rae, it's definitely an agent because I met the agent that discovered Issa Rae at an externship at UTA. He's like, we're at a point now in agencies where we're looking for people, not just based on their scripts. We're looking at their social media. We're looking to see if they have any projects out. So I think it's important for
Right.
writers to, as much as it hurts, because I know writers, we love to just write and be in our own little bubble, but
Yeah.
also time to,
Dwelling in basements, drinking Mountain Dew. That's the
yeah,
classic,
exactly.
or the cold
Exactly.
brew, I should say, in this case.
Now's the time to really start creating content with your friends and building community that way. Because if you wait and rely on the studios, you're going to be waiting even longer.
This pairs very nicely with a previous episode I did with a friend of mine, Nick Roth, who is a very experienced screenwriter. And I asked Nick if you could give a writer who's getting started today just one piece of advice. What would that piece of advice be? He said, without missing a beat, create your own content. And he made a really good point, actually, which is that even the process of being a producer and maybe even doing a few lines as an actor and then being in post production, all of that improves you as a
You're
writer.
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt so much truth in that because I've done it. Like I said, I've done that a few times, appeared in things that I've written, been involved in post production. And it helps you because the next script you write, you're already seeing right through to the edit. You're seeing the actors
Exactly.
perform the lines, you're seeing the edit come together. You get such a holistic look at everything. And it's great to hear you say that this is also going to help you to get noticed as a creator because that is, for me, again, going back to the whole business background, if you can go to somebody with a business proposal and you can say, look at everything I've done to mitigate risk, to
Mhm.
lower the potential downside and increase the potential upside, you're off to a great start. And
Yeah.
so, what I see when I think about content creators is if you can get somebody if you can get somebody's attention and say, rather than just here's a 30-page comedy script, here's a 3-minute proof of concept that we filmed.
Yeah.
Or even here's a 20-minute pilot that we filmed on a zero budget just because we have so much faith in this project. In some ways, people will tell you not to do that because they would want to have their own creative minds look at the script and decide what to do with it. But I think that's out of date advice. I think nowadays the best advice is show them what this is going to look like and show them that it already has some kind of support online, some kind of following, or at least some positive feedback from an audience somewhere so that they don't feel like they're taking such a big risk. Does that align with your experience?
It does. And I feel like, just going back to, since we're focusing on TV writers, there's a old school way of getting in, which is becoming a writer's PA, writer's assistant, and climbing your ladder that way. Even if you start that way, you got to remind yourself that you're living in a very expensive city. And a lot of times you're not making enough money as a writer's PA to get by. And I don't want writers to become so jaded because of the old school system of starting off as an assistant and then working your way up. You also have to keep in mind, as we mentioned several times, we mentioned the trades, deadline. It was either Deadline, Variety put out this article, how there's been less and less writers' rooms and more mini rooms, where instead of you writing for, I think, about 30 weeks at a time, they shortened that to 16 weeks. So now you have to find work at a much faster rate as a writer. Whereas if you're creating your own content, you're not just necessarily relying on the studios to pay you or the studios to give you your next gig. You're relying on yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It keeps you busy, it keeps you sharp. It means that you're not hanging around waiting for feedback. You're not feeling stagnant, which I think is one of the biggest challenges for anyone in the creative industry is you rush to the finish line to get your project finished and then you share it with people and wait and wait and wait and wait and you just start to feel like, oh, this is killing me, unless you've got other projects that you're focused on. And if that involves creating content, and I think maybe you and I and the other comedians among us have a slight advantage with that because working on comedy projects is just so much fun. It's just so much fun. It's spending a day laughing on a set, filming your own stuff, the sketch comedy, improv that you're filming, whatever it is. It just feels like a blessing. It really does. It makes you feel like I don't actually need to get paid to do this. This is just fun in and of itself. So I get that feeling, and you raise a really good point about LA being super expensive. And if you're not earning much or anything as a screenwriter, you have to figure out what that looks like for you. I'm fortunate enough to have a day job that I love doing. I'm a marketing consultant, and I know you're similar in the fact that you have a day job. And for the most part, I think people like us, we can find the enjoyment in that work. We can find the love for that work. And it takes the pressure off of us because we know we can stay in LA for a lot longer. We can keep in the fight. We can keep doing the thing. And I think that's what it will come down to, whether you keep on this path and decide to keep going for it and try and make it as a writer and, define that however way you want, or whether you eventually change paths. I would hate to change paths because of, out of necessity because I just ran out of money or energy or something like that,
No, likewise. I feel like that's why I'm like, as long as I'm possible, I want to continue to write. And I'm getting out of this headspace of commodifying my writing, which, yes, you have to, as a creator, you have to make money somehow. But I feel like, at least in the process of writing, do not think about the money. Do not think about whether or not you're going to have a large audience. Just write it. Just get it out there. This perfectionism is, I feel like, killing a lot of writers' dreams before you even get started.
Yeah, worrying about is there an audience for this? Worrying about is the streaming or is the development exec that I send it to going to like it? And look, I've given some writers advice to think about what people are watching out there because their work was so esoteric, it just wasn't going to get picked up because no one's taking that much of a risk right now. So there's a degree of truth in that, but I wouldn't want to be overly obsessed with that because that, like you said, it's going to kill your creative spirit. And I think it will result in you having analysis paralysis and not actually finishing projects and sharing them with people, which is just not productive. It's not a great strategy as a writer. You need to get things finished. Don't get it perfect, get it finished. That's
Get it finished.
yeah, absolutely. It's cliche to say it, but it's true. It's a cliche for a reason. Everything I've the most important things that I've learned about me as a writer is by finishing a project and sharing it with somebody, even if that feedback was, yeah, this just doesn't work. It's
Exactly, exactly.
very, very painful, but how else do you improve? You have to keep going and taking those rounds and rounds of feedback. So going back to the question of how does this impact writers? So we've covered make your own content. And if, by the way, if somebody isn't able to put on their acting hat or their producer hat or their director hat, are we saying find people that can do that with you so at least your work is being created by other people? Or do you think it's actually worth attempting to learn those things? Is it worth adding those hats to your collection and finding out whether you can direct with a bit of training? What do you think would be the best option there?
I am a firm believer of it depends on the person. I was that stubborn. For me, I know I was very stubborn in the sense that no, I need to know how to do everything. And I'm fortunate enough that I had a background prior. Like I used to do PA work for more so for sports, and it was kind of transferable. But I feel like I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now without help. And if you want to write, especially for TV, you have to be able to work with other people. And I don't think it's an issue to delegate tasks if you do not know how to direct, if you do not know how to shoot like cinematography. I don't think it's an issue to ask for help or work with people. I think if you're struggling to find people to work with just because you're not clicking with them, or let's say, well, none of my friends know how to do it either, or I live in such a small town that there's no talent out here, then I would recommend honestly applying for fellowship programs. Understanding that, of course, the big ones like a Disney, like an NBC are incredibly competitive. And it took me so long to realize this. I think I realized this year when it comes to applying those programs. Look at what they're, like you mentioned, look at what they're doing, but look at who has the first look deal. Like if you literally just type who has the first look deal with Disney, who has the first look deal, you will see a bunch of different production companies and what they're working on. So that way you're not blindsided when you, let's say, submit a fantasy horror to a company that none of the production companies that have a first look deal is doing anything in that genre.
Right, right. Yes, this is where you can lose a lot of enthusiasm very quickly if you're sending
Yeah,
things to the wrong people and their feedback is
exactly.
we don't do stuff like this, then it can very quickly get disheartening.
Yeah, I feel like I was doing that for a while where I was just sending whatever. And I was like, why is no one, I know I'm funny. Like, why is no one caring about this? And then I finally just took some time and looked at it. I was like, I'm writing stuff that they're literally not producing. I'm writing stuff that, and comedy right now is hard in terms of the fact that a lot of studios are not looking at comedy because comedy is not international. It's
Yes,
harder to
it's
translate comedy.
yeah, it's intrinsically local and specific,
Exactly.
or if it is international, it's funny with the sound down. It's very physical, and
But comedy, yeah,
a lot of those productions don't really work so well. And yet it is the space that I am in and you are in, so we keep trying because people do need funny content. And
exactly.
I think with comedy, the advantage you have is that there are fewer good comedy writers than there are dramatic writers. I think a lot of people can train themselves to be a good or even a very good dramatic writer. I don't
Yeah.
think it's as easy to train yourself
With
to be very
comedy.
funny. I don't think so. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I think the best advice I got was from a TV director. She's directed on shows like Green Sugar. And she was reading my script. And after the first 2 pages, she's like, I did not laugh once. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was so gut wrenching. She's like, it's important when you're writing comedy that every page has a punchline. That there is so much laughter. I should be dying laughing, especially your first two pages.
Right. And
And
it has to
this
be
is,
funny on the
yeah,
page. That's the tricky
it
part.
has to be
It's
funny
like,
on the page.
yeah,
Yeah,
if it's funny to you because you can see the edit and the comic timing and the, that's good. But if you read it and it doesn't come off the page as funny, that's something that I have really struggled with because the Brits,
yeah.
we're quite dry with our humor. So
Y'all do have dry humor.
yeah, so we don't do a lot of signposting and like winking at the camera. Here comes a joke. And I've written full comedies before, and then the feedback was this reads like a drama. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's
The
supposed to
worst
be
feedback
dry
you could
humor.
get as a comedy writer is like, this reads as a drama. It's like, oh, but it's supposed to be funny. Like,
Yep, yep,
ah,
yep. If this read like a drama, that means you've missed at least 30 jokes because there's a joke on every
yeah,
page. Uh,
there should be a joke on every page.
yeah, yeah. And I think Seinfeld it is that talks about stand-up comedy. It might not have been him that said this, but one of them said, if you're not making your audience laugh every 9 seconds, you're not good enough yet. And
Yeah.
that's such a high standard. But then you watch a really good stand-up comic, which I started to do after I heard that quote. It's like that's actually pretty accurate. That's
Yeah.
almost every 9 seconds you're laughing out loud at something they've said. It's incredible. Um, this has been great. I have a few minutes here and then we need to wrap. And I want to make sure that we get information from you about where people can follow up with you because I know you're creating your own stuff. So without meaning to put you on the spot, I will also obviously just link things in the description. But is there somewhere like a show that you're now doing that has a website, or is it all happening for you on TikTok and Instagram? Where could people go to follow up and learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so on all social media platforms, you can follow me at Jonique Stars, Jonique Jonique Stars with a Z. And that's where you're going to find my YouTube channel, my TikTok, my Instagram. That's where you'll find the latest comedy shows I'm doing because I always do stand up. That's where you find my Kickstarter link for the pilot I'm working on called Ride On. You can also follow the Ride On page at Pilot Ride On. I have an Instagram and TikTok page for it as well.
I love that. Yeah, I will get all of those linked in the description. Any final words to any screenwriters watching this who are now maybe in a state of panic, thinking that they need to learn all about the industry? Where are some places that they could go to start this journey of educating themselves? And full confession, I'll probably start doing this a bit more because speaking to you today has inspired me to take this a bit more seriously. I know the obvious ones. There's Deadline, there's Variety.
Yeah.
Any other resources that you would cite as reliable places to go for this industry news?
There is this one, I haven't been on it in a minute. It's called Synopsis with a C, and that's more so for television news. Yeah, I don't know why they
Synopsis with a C.
it's
Okay.
interesting, but they report news even faster than Deadline and Variety when it comes to television. Something that it took me a while to learn. You need to start following the pages on LinkedIn, Netflix, Disney. Follow all those pages on LinkedIn and follow the recruiters. So if you're looking for
Mm,
roles, especially like let's say you just want your foot in, you don't necessarily need to start off with a creative role. Follow those recruiters. They're always posted online. There's so many fellowships which I could share. I have a fellowship tracker that I've started. There's so many people that started fellowship trackers,
mm.
but it really just depends on what type of writing you want to do. And lastly, if I feel like if you're on a point of you're trying to shoot your own thing, look at your local city and state at their film office because it's going to let you know information about permits, information about shooting costs as well. That's something that I think is very helpful for writers too. Oh, and Writers Guild, of course. You can't go wrong with the Writers Guild website.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a regular one. Yes, that was amazing. That was I feel like that was a whole download of information there. So I will be rewatching this episode and making notes because I am tragically unable to type while doing an episode. But that was great. I love that. Thank you very much for the information.
Of
And
course.
I feel like there is a part two to this conversation because I'm short on time today and I know you're a very, very busy person, but we didn't even touch on the impact that this is having on social media specifically. We talked about it a bit with TikTok and being a rival, but I know we have a lot more stuff that we could talk about. I was hoping we would get to it today, but you know what? Let's do a part two in a few weeks. Let's circle back and give it the attention that it deserves, because I think that's another very big topic that we can dive into.
Especially with the TikTok ban that's going on. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that would be very good
Mhm.
timing to get back to that. All right, thank you so much for your time today, Casey. This has been educational for me. This has been inspiring and educational. I cannot thank you enough for doing this. And yeah, part two coming soon.
Sounds good. Thank
All
you.
right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.